brings us right up to that 6 o'clock hour in this lovely Thursday evening. And as always, this is your live reading for you. We have your two readers in, and Deb Addie and Mike Gary. And it looks like our readers are ready and ready to go to get started on your live reading for you. So I'm going to hand it on over to the two of them, and they're going to get started on your live reading for you.
Thank you very much. This is Mike Garrity, and I usually read the Lincoln Journal-Star on Monday morning, but we've been both transplanted tonight, and I'm reading the World Herald tonight. And I'm starting off on the front page with, I'm considering this good news, and it's kind of hard to find good news in the paper tonight. But this one says, the headline says, scientists nail down Zika's link to birth defects. Until now, most Zika research has chronicled damage to newborns who are inadvertently and haphazardly exposed to the virus. Now scientists have taken a different tack. They have deliberately infected developing mice pups and tiny clusters of lab-grown brain cells so they could observe and measure the damage that ensued. The results of these experiments nail down the causal link between the Zika virus and the rash of birth defects seen over the past year in Brazil. And they began to show how a virus thought to be little more than a pest crosses the placental barrier and makes a beeline for a fetus's brain. Going to another page. In doing so, the results give scientists some insight into why a mother's infection with Zika early in pregnancy appears to result in far more extensive damage than when her infection occurs at a later stage. The new reports published Wednesday in the journals Nature, Cell and Cell Stem Cell suggest that when the Zika virus takes hold in the first trimester, it makes its way quickly to the uterus and to cells that line and normally help protect the placenta. While that firewall between mother and child is still immature, Zika attacks those cells and penetrates the placental barrier. As it does so, the virus also disrupts the growth of placental blood vessels, limiting blood flow to the baby and stunting fetal development. If the fetus survives the onslaught, the virus will make its way to its developing brain. There, Zika will wreak destruction on the stem cells that are meant to develop into a mature organ. As Zika replicates madly, these stem cells and immature neurons die off in droves, the researchers found. The differentiation of tissues that normally produces a healthy brain goes awry, sometimes subtly, sometimes horribly. In humans, scientists have observed microcephaly, diffuse calcium deposits, and brain structures that are either abnormally large or small. In surviving mouse pups, researchers found that brains infected in utero were abnormal in a variety of ways, not all of them identical to effects seen in humans. But the relationship between Zika infection and fetal abnormality was direct and consistent. And that says something important about the virus, said Dr. Michael Diamond, who studies infectious diseases at Washington University in St. Louis and was lead author of the report in Cell. Zika alone is enough to cause these effects, Diamond said. That collective finding puts to rest many scientists' suspicions that Zika might need to interact in some other way, say a past infection with dengue fever for brain damage to result in a fetus. That's not to say there aren't other factors that may predispose people to get Zika, Diamond said, but you don't need all those things for brain damage to occur, he added. Their work is motivated by the tragic outcomes in Brazil, the mysterious odyssey of this virus, first identified in Uganda in 1947, and by the fact that Zika is easier and less deadly to work with than a virus like Ebola. I know the public is anxious to have vaccines and therapeutics, Diamond said, but seeing research progress at this rate is very remarkable. This does not always happen. Fauci concurred. This is what happens when you get good people pursuing a new problem.
Thank you very much, Mike. This first story is from the New York Times. Washington. For decades, visitors to the ghostly dome in Hiroshima that stands like a sole survivor from the dropping of the atomic bomb there more than 70 years ago entered a world that mixed unspeakable tragedy with historical amnesia. The site, which President Obama will visit this month, reflected an almost universal Japanese view that the city was a victim of unnecessary brutality, parents and children incinerated, thousands killed, and a generation poisoned by radiation. Yet museum exhibits nearby were largely silent on what led to that horror, a Japanese war machine that tore through Asia for a decade before the morning that changed the history of the 20th century. For Americans of World War II generation and many of their children, Hiroshima is at the center of a very different narrative. They believe President Harry S. Truman's decision to drop the bomb saved tens of thousands of American lives that would have been lost in an invasion of Honshu, Japan's main island. Ask the few surviving veterans of that generation, those who fought their way from Iwo Jima to Okinawa and knew what was coming next. And there is no looking back at Truman's decision. No moral equivalence between the Japanese campaign that killed more than 20 million in Asia and the horror of the bomb that ended it all. With his decision to speak beneath that famous dome, Mr. Obama is taking a step 11 of his predecessors avoided. Merely by showing up in Hiroshima, he will have no choice but to navigate a minefield of conflicting memory in Japan and in the United States. The two drastically different interpretations of what happened have always pulled, sometimes in unspoken ways, at the strong alliance between the United States and Japan that emerged from the ashes. Yet today, with some notable dissents in both countries, those interpretations remain as frozen in history as the shadow etched on the stone steps of a bank building near Ground Zero, created by the body of a poor soul who was sitting there at detonation. Mr. Obama will make no apology in Hiroshima, the White House insisted on Tuesday. He will not second-guess Truman for the decision to drop the bomb in Hiroshima, or for the far more questionable call to drop a second 3 days later on Nagasaki, because the emperor had not yet surrendered. This visit will offer an opportunity to honor the memory of all innocents who were lost during the war, Mr. Obama's Deputy National Security Advisor, Benjamin J. Rhodes, wrote on Tuesday. For a president who came to office talking of a world without nuclear weapons, a vision he has had more trouble realizing than he could have imagined, it is also a chance to say, in the last months of his presidency, that the risk of new Hiroshimas is hardly gone. It may also be the right moment to leap into that historical breach. Hiroshima has unleashed great literature, starting with John Hersey's unparalleled account in The New Yorker, published in 1946 while the city still lay in ruins, and some of the most profound moral debates of the 20th century. Today, survivors of that morning when the Enola Gay swept high over the city and delivered its payload are even harder to find than American veterans, now in their 90s, who believe their lives were spared by the same act. Newer exhibits in Hiroshima have reminded visitors that the city was no random target, but a buzzing manufacturing hub of the Japanese war machine. Some of us believe that when we think about the bomb, we should think about the war too, Hiroshima's mayor told me in 1994 as we walked through the new exhibit, which Japanese rightists had opposed opening. Yet even today, 22 years later, the sanitized accounts of the war taught to a new generation of Japanese schoolchildren largely avoid delving into the decision-making that led to the Pacific War, the rape of Nanjing, or questions of whether the comfort women were organized by the Japanese military. The vividness of Hiroshima has been melded with anodyne accounts of what preceded it, reinforcing the sense among Americans that, unlike Germany, Japan has never fully grappled with its past. Many Japanese say the same of the United States. They remember that when the Smithsonian organized the first exhibit of the Enola Gay in 1995 for the 50th anniversary, veterans objected so loudly to the effort the bomb and its aftermath that Congress held hearings and the museum's director was forced to resign. The exhibition was watered down, and even today, when the famed B-29 can be seen at the Stephen F. Udvar Hazy Center outside Dulles International Airport, any discussion of the short and long-term horrors of dropping the bomb are cursory and the history behind it controversial. The top American military leaders who fought World War II, much to the surprise of many who are not aware of the record, were quite clear that the atomic bomb was unnecessary, that Japan was on the verge of surrender, and for many, that the destruction of large number of civilians was immoral. Gar Alperovitz, a leader of the movement to revise the United States' own historical accounting, wrote last year in The Nation. Between now and May 27th, when Mr. Obama will visit the site, the big question will be how views have evolved in both countries since 1995. In Japan, I don't think there has been much real evolution, at least among the right wing and the amnesiacs who deny Japan's destructive war in Asia and insist they were the victims, said Richard Samuels, a professor at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, who has written some of the most insightful in post-war cultures that surrounded it. For them, Obama's visit will be a chance to reiterate that they were right. Mr. Samuels said it would be harder to predict the reaction in the United States. In the midst of a presidential campaign, he said this will be a rich target for those who say this is the next step on the Obama apology tour. But if anything, the questions surrounding those last months of the Pacific War in 1945 have only grown stronger. The firebombing of Tokyo in March of that year resulted in nearly 100,000 deaths by some accounts. And many who questioned the decision to drop the atomic bomb have asked why it was not first exploded in an uninhabited place to demonstrate the dimensions of the new weapon's power. But the biggest change, Mr. Samuels said, may come from the absence of witnesses. 20 years ago, the greatest generation, people with a living memory of World War II, were still around. Today, they are down to a precious few, and soon the only ones who will be debating the legacy of Hiroshima will not have felt the urgency to drop the bomb or live the horror of the result.
Okay, back to the World Herald and this story. In Syria, Islamic State again targets Palmyra. Islamic State militants advanced toward the central Syrian city of Palmyra on Wednesday, threatening to besiege the world-famous ancient site several weeks after the government recaptured it from the extremists. The offensive came as a ceasefire over the northern city of Aleppo ticked down to its final hours, threatening to plunge the divided metropolis back into violence. Media allied with the Islamic State and other activists said the militants seized a strategically located but deserted rocket launching site close to an airbase less than 40 miles from Palmyra. For the government forces, the capture effectively severs a highway linking Palmyra to the government-controlled T4 airbase and the provincial capital Homs, threatening government supply routes. The Britain-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights and other activists confirmed the reported advance. The development comes after intense clashes with government troops near the airbase, and a week after the extremist group advanced toward natural gas fields to the north. Syrian state media denied reports that the road between Homs and Palmyra was cut. Syrian troops, with the help of Russian airstrikes, regained control of the world-famous ancient city in March, after the Islamic State had controlled it for nearly 10 months. And during their rule, Islamic State militants destroyed many of Palmyra's relics and displaced its residents. Also Wednesday, an airstrike on a medical center in Islamic State-held territory north of the eastern city of Deir el-Zur killed at least 7 people, among them a child. The observatory reported it was unclear who was behind the attack on the village of Shahil. Meanwhile, the Russian military announced that a Russian soldier had died in Syria, the 9th Russian casualty since the start of Moscow's Syria campaign. A defense ministry statement said the soldier was wounded by shelling as he was escorting a convoy of vehicles and later died of his wounds.
Thank you. Back to the New York Times from Rome. Pope Francis said on Thursday that he would set up a commission to study whether women can serve as deacons in the Roman Catholic Church, revealing an openness to re-examining the Church's long-held insistence on an all-male clergy. His move was hailed as a breakthrough by Catholic women who have clamored for years to be given a more prominent role in the Church and who cite research showing that women in the Church's early history served as deacons. But the idea will face stiff resistance from some who believe that ordaining women as deacons is the first step toward ordaining female priests, which recent popes have ruled out, citing church doctrine. The Pope's comments were made during an assembly of leaders of women's religious orders and were consistent with his style, a seemingly off-the-cuff remark that opened a broad horizon of possibilities. During a discussion at the Vatican on Thursday, which at one point touched on the role that female deacons played during the early years of the Church, Francis was asked about the possibility of an official commission to study the issue. His response was, in essence, why not? Constituting an official commission that might study the question, Pope Francis mused out loud, according to the National Catholic Reporter. I believe, yes, it would do good for the Church to clarify this point. I am in agreement. I accept, the Pope said later. It seems useful to me to have a commission that would clarify this well. Deacons are ordained ministers in the Roman Catholic Church, and in many parishes they perform the same role as priests. They are permitted to preach at Mass, perform baptisms, witness marriages, and conduct funeral services. Deacons must be men over the age of 35, and they may be married, though if a deacon's wife dies, he is expected to remain celibate. The Church in the United States has for decades been actively encouraging men to become deacons to assist priests stretched thin because of a shortage of priests. The United States Conference of Catholic Bishops says more than 13,000 men are now serving in what is called the permanent diaconate. This is not the first time the issue of female deacons has come up. In 1995, an American group of canon law experts said that ordaining women as deacons in the Church would be in keeping with Catholic theology and past practice, though the Vatican never acted on that recommendation. The topic has continued to be discussed, however. Just last week, scholars met at the University of St. Michael's College in Toronto for a conference titled Women, the Diaconate, and the Future of Ministry. Groups that have pushed for women to play a greater role in the Church welcomed the Pope's declarations as an important, if embryonic, step. The Reverend James Bretsky, a professor of theology at Boston College, said in a statement, "I can't underscore enough how groundbreaking this is for the Church." Father Bretsky, who, like Pope Francis, is a member of the Jesuit religious order, added, "If women can be ordained as deacons, then this is going to weaken, not destroy, but weaken significantly the argument that women absolutely are incapable of being ordained as priests. So this is an opening more than a crack in the door." The Women's Ordination Conference, an American organization that supports the idea of female deacons, priests, and bishops, said in a statement, "Opening a commission to study the diaconate for women would be a great step for the Vatican in recognizing its own history."
Pirates in new hotspot shifting from oil to humans. Half a decade ago, attacks by pirates from Somalia were so common and so costly in lives and money that a naval task force with over 24 vessels from EU countries, the United States, China, Russia, India, and Japan banded together to restore order to one of the world's busiest shipping routes. Those cooperative efforts largely succeeded, as have recent patrols in and around the similarly bustling Straits of Malacca in Southeast Asia, where pirate attacks have fallen steeply in the past 6 months. In 2015, there were only 17 pirate attacks near Somalia, down from 151 in 2011. But on the other side of the African continent, a new pirate hotspot is emerging. The Gulf of Guinea, a body of water tucked into the curve where West Africa meets Central Africa, is now the most dangerous region in the world for seafarers, according to a new report by the nonprofit organization Oceans Beyond Piracy. The pirates in these waters are mostly from the Niger Delta, an oil-rich part of Nigeria that has seen 2 decades of violence as militias fight over control of land and resources. Before 2015, they mostly targeted oil tankers, siphoning the black gold and ferrying it back to the mainland, where they sold it on the black market. But the price of crude oil has fallen precipitously since mid-2014, which means that human hostages are now more valuable than their once precious cargo. The new report says that kidnapping for ransom became the region's most pervasive piracy model last year, and that trend has only escalated in the first quarter of 2016. In most kidnapping incidents, the pirates board the vessel after firing at the bridge to suppress any opposition and intimidate the crew, and then proceed to isolate the ranking officers and engineers who net the highest ransoms. The same pirate gangs responsible for these attacks are likely the same groups responsible for kidnapping and violence in the Niger Delta. In most cases, victims were taken to small islands in the Delta where local militias have bases and were held from 2 to 3 weeks. Known ransoms have reached as high as $400,000 in the region. That's much lower than average ransoms paid to pirates off the coast of Somalia, which the BBC reported as almost $5 million. Yet the group's report claims that as many as 70% of kidnapping incidents in the Gulf of Guinea go unreported, and that all but a few ransoms are paid through a secret back. The Gulf is a major transit point for cocoa and metal in addition to oil. And because only a few pirates have been caught and not one has been prosecuted, the report says crews don't report incidents for fear that they will come face to face with the same captors on subsequent trips. The lack of prosecution is indicative of a larger issue. Nigeria and its neighbors are struggling to keep their seas under control without outside help. Last month, Nigeria and Equatorial Guinea agreed to create a combined patrol force, but it will be far smaller than those in the other regions.
Thanks, Mike. From Moscow, as American and Allied officials celebrated the opening of a long-awaited missile defense system in Europe with a ribbon cutting and a band, the reaction in Russia on Thursday suggested the system had raised the risks of a nuclear war. Russian officials reiterated their position that the American-built system imperiled Russia's security. But the public discussion in Russia was darker, including online commentary of how a nuclear confrontation might play out in Europe, and the prospect that Romania, the system's host, might be reduced to smoking ruins. We have been saying right from when this story started that our experts are convinced that the deployment of the ABM system poses a certain threat to the Russian Federation, the Kremlin spokesman Dmitry S. Peskov told reporters in a conference call. Measures are being taken to ensure the necessary level of security for Russia, he said. The president himself, let me remind you, has repeatedly asked who the system will work against. The United States has asserted that the anti-ballistic missile system would protect only against rogue states, particularly Iran, and provide no protection for either Europe or the United States from Russia's far larger arsenal of nuclear missiles. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization site will be controlled by an American officer. The system, called Aegis Ashore, was essentially transferred from a seaborne launch pad onto land in Romania at the Deveslu Air Base. The United States on Friday planned to break ground on a second site in Poland that should be completed in 2018. But a Deputy United States Defense Secretary, Robert Work, reiterated Thursday there are no plans at all to strengthen this missile umbrella to protect against Russia. In Moscow, the Foreign Ministry spokeswoman, Maria Zakharova, said Russian defense experts consider the site a threat. We still view the destructive actions of the United States and its allies in the area of missile defense as a direct threat to global and regional security, Ms. Zakharova said. She said that the Aegis Ashore launch pad was practically identical to a system used aboard Aegis warships that is capable of launching Tomahawk cruise missiles. While the United States says it has no Tomahawk missiles at the site in Romania, the launch pad violates a 1987 treaty intended to take the superpowers off their hair-trigger nuclear alert, the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, by banning land-based cruise and medium-range missiles with a range of from 300 to 3,400 miles. The short flight time of these missiles diminished to mere minutes, the window Soviet leaders would have had after a warning to decide whether to launch a second strike, raising the risks of mishaps. Any redeployment of nuclear-capable missiles in Central Europe would roll the clock back to this nerve-wracking 1980s status quo. We have to announce this openly without any additional diplomatic formulations, Ms. Zakharova said, of the Russian assertion the site violates the intermediate range missile ban. We are talking about violation of this treaty. President Vladimir V. Putin of Russia has warned that an American anti-missile deployment in Eastern Europe could prompt Russia to withdraw from the treaty. The United States last year accused Russia of violating the treaty by failing to declare the the true range of two missile types. Last fall, Russian security officials appeared to drop hints of another military response to the missile defense system, a nuclear-armed drone submarine. Russia, this leak appeared to say, has options. During a high-level security meeting, a television camera zoomed in on an open binder showing the weapon's design, ostensibly by accident. The drone, according to easily decipherable text accompanying the design drawing, would be capable of carrying a large nuclear device into coastal waters and detonating it, touching off a radioactive tsunami to flood and contaminate seaside cities. The submarine would defeat important economic objects of an enemy in coastal zones, bringing guaranteed and unacceptable losses on the country's territory by forming a wide area of radioactive contamination incompatible with conducting military, economic, or any other activities there for a long period of time, it said. A Russian commentator, Konstantin Bogdanov, wrote on lenta.ru, a news portal, that the anti-missile sites in Eastern Europe might even accelerate the slippery slope to nuclear war in a crisis. They would inevitably become priority targets in the event of nuclear war, possibly even targets for preventive strikes. Countries like Romania that host American anti-missile systems might be the only casualties, he wrote, whereas the United States would then reconcile with Russia over the smoking ruins of the East European elements of the missile defense system.
It's amazing the ways we have of killing people. Okay, let's move on to some local and legislative news. And this isn't as earth-shaking as what you just finished reading, but
That's good.
I think so too. Yard waste. It's about yard waste. Yard waste, trash still will both go to the landfill. Omahans can keep bagging their yard waste, but Waste Management will not be collecting it separately again this summer. The mayor's office announced Wednesday that Waste Management will collect trash and yard waste together, dumping both of them at the landfill. Under the city's solid waste contract, Omaha's yard waste is normally required to be taken separately to a composting site. The change is designed to prevent the kind of delays in picking up yard waste that prompted complaints from Omahans last summer, Mayor Jean Stothert said. And at least one city council member is not happy with her solution. I'm concerned about the future of our composting program and opposed to dumping yard waste into the landfill unless a better environmental option is identified and implemented, said Councilman Pete Festerson, who serves on the council's Public Works Committee. Last June, the city allowed Waste Management to start collecting trash and yard waste together to help alleviate pickup delays. Stothert presented that then as a temporary solution, so Waste Management could hire more people with commercial driver's licenses. But she said Wednesday that the company simply couldn't find enough workers. She said she was confident that the company had exhausted its options because we've been on them since last summer, and they have showed us what they've done. The mayor said the company has offered raises and signing bonuses and participated in job fairs. When yard waste went to the composting facility, it was used to produce Omagro, the city's compost product. Stothert said the city has enough compost in reserve to produce Omagro this summer. She noted that composting is a money loser for the city. The mayor's office said people will not be limited in the amount of yard waste they can put out for collection each week. Festerson said that if Waste Management can't abide by the terms of its contract, it should compensate the city for the decreased service. 9 months should have been adequate time to address the staffing shortage, he said. Stothert said her office already is negotiating with the company about decreasing the fees the city pays. She said she's looking for the company to either charge less per household or charge less for the tipping fee or the amount the city pays to put waste in the landfill.
Thank you. From London, the British government presented its plans for the future of the British Broadcasting Corporation on Thursday, urging the publicly funded broadcaster to be more distinctive in its programming while transforming and consolidating how the BBC is governed. The government, preoccupied by a coming referendum on Britain's membership in the European Union and wary of further fights with Parliament, pulled back from radical changes like influencing BBC programming, though the changes in how the BBC is overseen are a delicate topic given its strong tradition of editorial independence. In a move that seemed intended to assuage concerns about political interference, the new charter for the BBC would take effect in January and last 11 years instead of the current 10, so that the cycle for renewing it will not coincide with the 5-year national election cycle. The proposed charter, as presented to Parliament by the Culture Secretary, John Whittingdale, secures the BBC's funding through the next charter and allows the license fee paid by most British households, frozen at £145.5 per year, to rise with inflation. The BBC now gets about £3.72 billion a year from the fee and receives £1.3 billion in commercial and other income. The new charter also aims to close a loophole requiring those who watch television programs after broadcast only on their computers, smartphones, or tablets to also pay the license fee. Mr. Whittingdale, concerned about the impact of the huge BBC on the commercial market, has put a requirement to provide distinctive content into the broadcaster's core mission to inform, educate, and entertain. It will also highlight the requirement for the BBC to be impartial while promising to maintain its independence. The new mission statement will read, "To act in the public interest, serving all audiences with impartial, high quality, and distinctive media content and services that inform, educate, and entertain." The power of the BBC is immense, and the government is emphatically not saying that the BBC should not be popular, Mr. Whittingdale said. With a 33% share in television, a 53% share in radio, and the third most popular UK website, and with only 27% of people believing that the BBC makes lots of programs that are more daring and innovative than other broadcasters, he said, editors should ask themselves whether new programs are sufficiently innovative and high quality, and not just how will it do in the ratings. The government will also require the BBC to disclose the salaries of its highest paid talent if they receive more than £450,000 a year, which is the current salary of the Director General, Tony Hall, and to do more to ensure diversity of programs and hiring. The most important change will be in how the BBC is governed. The current structure with internal management overseen by the BBC Trust, with members appointed by the government, is flawed, having to act as both cheerleader and regulator, but without editorial control, and will be scrapped. Instead, the government proposes a unitary BBC board of 14 members, including non-executive members responsible for budget, content, and editorial decisions. After squabbles, sorry, I lost my place, about independence, the BBC would name at least half of the 14 members and the government no more than 6. The government is insisting that the current head of the BBC Trust, Rona Fairhead, lead the new board at least through her current contract, which runs through October 2018. But for the first time, the BBC will be regulated by Ofcom, the body that regulates the telecommunications industry from phones and radio licenses to the internet and the post office. And the BBC will be audited by the National Audit Office, which audits most public institutions. The BBC, though largely supportive of the proposed charter, said in a statement that it still had concerns. Those include how the BBC should be audited and the new unitary board appointed. Mr. Hall, the Director General, said, "We have an honest disagreement with the government on this. I do not believe that the appointments proposals for the new unitary board are yet right. It is vital for the future of the BBC that its independence is fully preserved," he added. The opposition Labour Party accused Mr. Whittingdale of ideologically driven meddling and said his proposals were totally out of step with the license fee payers who value and support the BBC. The publication of the white paper will be followed by further debate in Parliament and outside, and could be amended, but the charter does not require a vote of Parliament and is meant to be ready to replace the old charter that runs out at the end of the year.
Okay, here's a story that illustrates why it's important to get out and vote. 10 votes separate candidates in South Omaha is the headline. The outcome of the South Omaha legislative race might not be decided until early June. On the other hand, the second Omaha area race that appeared in doubt Tuesday was settled by Wednesday morning. In that race, Bill Armbrust edged out Pat Borchers to advance to in western Douglas County's District 39. Armbrust will face Lou Ann Linehan in the fall. In South Omaha's District 7, a mere 10 votes separated the second and third place finishers when vote counting ended on Wednesday morning. At that point, former State Senator John Sinowicki was ahead of current Senator Nicole Fox. Both trailed Tony Vargas, an Omaha Public Schools board member. The top two vote getters will advance to the general election. Based on the current vote count, Sinowicki would continue and Fox would be ousted. But Fox is not ready to concede the race, said her campaign manager, Rod Edwards. We believe that we still have an opportunity to pick up enough votes to finish in second and advance to the general election, Edwards said. Fox's campaign based its hopes on the estimated 1,800 early ballots that were returned to the election commissioner's office Tuesday, and on some 865 provisional ballots cast during the day, all yet to be tallied. Voters can cast provisional ballots if, say, they have moved within a county but not yet changed their registration. The ballots are counted as valid if election officials can verify the voter's registration and new address. Douglas County Election Commissioner Brian Cruz said that he expects to finish counting the early ballots by Friday and the provisional ballots by early next week. He said he didn't know how many of those ballots from District 7 came from District 7, which runs from about California Street to the Sarpy County line and from the Missouri River to US 75. Edwards said he thought Fox might pick up enough votes to pull ahead once the additional ballots are counted, but the race could remain in doubt and require a recount if the margin of votes between second and third place remains small. The recount would be ordered by the State Board of Canvassers, which meets June 6th to certify election results. The recount would be done on June 8th. Neil Erickson, Deputy Director of the State for Elections, said state law provides for an automatic recount if the difference between the winning and losing is 1% or less of the number of votes cast for the top vote getter. In this case, Vargas got 1,118 votes, so a recount would be triggered if the difference between the two other candidates remains at 11 votes or less. Erickson cautioned that the threshold could change depending on how many more votes Vargas gets from the early and provisional ballots.
Thanks. From Rome. After decades of struggle by gay rights groups and months of contested political negotiations, the Italian parliament on Wednesday evening gave final approval to a law recognizing civil unions of same-sex couples. The vote, 372 to 51 with 99 abstentions, was followed by long applause in the Chamber of Deputies, the lower house of Parliament. At the Trevi Fountain in Rome, people with rainbow flags gathered to celebrate. It was a historic occasion for a nation that is still dominated by the Roman Catholic Church, which opposed the measure and where traditional family norms are still strong. It was also a victory for Prime Minister Matteo Renzi, who supported the bill. Nearly every Western country has legalized same-sex marriage or some form of civil union for gays and lesbians. Italy was perhaps the most prominent exception, and the issue has generated considerable controversy. Proponents of same-sex unions have complained that the law falls short of granting full equality to same-sex couples. In particular, it does not recognize same-sex marriages. It will not allow someone in a same-sex civil union to legally adopt his or her partner's biological child. A so-called stepchild adoption provision was opposed by center-right parties and by the church and was ultimately dropped from the legislation. The Senate approved the bill in February, but a final vote in the lower house was required for the legislation to take effect. Earlier on Wednesday, the government won a vote of confidence, 369 to 193, that it called on Tuesday, tying its fate to the legislation. Advocates call the lower house decision historic. The wall erected mostly by the Vatican against civil rights in this country has fallen, so it is a historically and politically important moment, said Franco Griglini, the honorary president of Archigay, an advocacy group and a gay rights advocate. At the same time, the same-sex couples in Italy wanted marriage equality, a right held by their counterparts in the United States and many Western European countries, and he said the struggle would continue. It has been nearly 30 years since lawmakers first proposed giving legal recognition to civil unions in Italy. The Vatican, under Pope Francis, while expressing more liberal positions on some social issues, has kept up steadfast opposition to legal recognition of same-sex couples, influencing some Italian lawmakers. Mr. Renzi pledged early on that his government would right what was widely seen as an injustice. There was pressure, too, from the European Court of Human Rights, which ruled last July that Italy's failure to recognize same-sex unions violated the European Convention on Human Rights. A first draft of the law, it also grants certain new civil rights, like access to public housing to all unmarried couples, including heterosexual ones, was watered down when the Senate adopted it in February after it lost the support of a crucial party faction, and the government had to scramble for votes among more conservative lawmakers. The scrapping of the stepchild adoption clause was part of the resulting. The controversy revealed Italian lawmakers to be more conservative than their constituents. The Italian population metabolized the recognition of same-sex couples some time ago, said Chiara Saraceno, a noted sociologist who retired as a professor of sociology at the University of Turin, citing a 2009 study that confirmed that a wide majority of Italians favored legal recognition of same-sex partnerships, though not gay marriage. Italian lawmakers have always lagged behind when it comes to family issues, Professor Saraceno said, whether because of traditionalist viewpoints or fear of irritating the church. The Italian population is ready for this, she said of the legislation. While many supporters said on Wednesday that the new law was better than nothing, many remain bitter. This law is born as an old law that should have been voted 20 years ago when civil unions began to be legally recognized in other countries, said Michela Marzano of the Democratic Party, who noted the law's shortcomings. Italy remains a culturally backward country where the only possible family is still the traditional one, she said. It prefers to penalize children rather than recognize the multifaceted families that already exist. President Sergio Mattarella has a month to sign the legislation, a step that is usually a formality.
Okay, we're getting close to the time for the obituaries tonight because we both have quite a few obituaries. I think I can sneak in this one story, which is kind of a shocker, I think. TSA officials find loaded gun in carry-on bag at Epley. Screeners at Epley Airfield found a loaded handgun in a passenger's carry-on bag Wednesday morning. The gun was a Kimber Solo 9mm loaded with 12 rounds, found with an X-ray, a Transportation Security Administration press release said. Airport police took the weapon and interviewed the passenger, who was released pending further review. It was the first firearm the TSA found this year at an Epley checkpoint. Last year, 13 were found. The TSA reminds travelers that they can travel with guns, just not in carry-on bags. Firearms can be transported in a checked bag declared at the aircraft ticket counter and locked in a hard-sided container. Nationwide, the TSA has found more than 950 guns on carry-on bags at checkpoints so far this year. In 2015, the agency found 2,653 at checkpoints. The TSA can levy a civil penalty of up to $11,000 against a passenger who brings a firearm to a checkpoint. The average penalty for a loaded gun is $3,000. The average for an unloaded one is $1,500.
Well, I wonder if they ever get those guns back.
I don't know.
All right, I think it's time now for us to turn to the obituaries, and I will begin, if that's all right with you, with those found in the Lincoln Journal-Star. ARP, Charles H. ARP, 85, of Lincoln. He was born in Harvard, Nebraska. The funeral service will be 10:30 Friday the 13th at Trinity Lutheran Church in Lincoln. Metcalf Funeral Home is in charge of arrangements. Memorials to Trinity Lutheran Church, Trinity Lutheran School, or the family. Bonneau, Janet K. Bonneau, 74, of Lincoln, formerly of Crete. She was born in Platte Center, Nebraska. Memorial service will be 11 o'clock Saturday, May 14th at the First Congregational United Church of Christ in Crete. Memorials may be directed to First Congregational UCC for ongoing botanical landscaping or to Pancreatic Cancer Action Network for promoting early detection. Byron L. Boslow of Lincoln. He was 72 years old, and that's all the information we have right now. Bridger, Donald Patrick Bridger, age 60, of Grand Junction. There will be a rosary May 16th at 10 o'clock at Blessed Sacrament. A mass will follow. Broadwell, Darlene Ann Broadwell, 80, of York. Memorial service will be held at 10 o'clock Saturday the 14th at First United Methodist Church in York. Memorials may be directed to the Alzheimer's Foundation. Capek, Edna Capek, age 90, of Milligan. She was born in Friend, Nebraska. The funeral will be at 10:30 in the morning, Friday, at the United Methodist Church in Milligan. Farmer and Son Funeral Home, the Costas Chapel in Milligan, is in charge of arrangements. Memorials are directed to the United Methodist Church or the Milligan Library. Carmichael, Mildred Carmichael of Beatrice. She was 94. That's all the information on that. Dennis, Lloyd Michael Dennis, age 60. There will be a celebration of life for Lloyd from 6:15 p.m. to 9 p.m. Thursday, that's today, at the Huskerville Pub and Pizza, located at 2805 Northwest 48th in Lincoln. Food will be provided. Please bring only your memories. Finch, Norman E. Finch, age 67, of Lincoln. Celebration of Norman's life will be 3 p.m. Saturday, May 14th at College View Seventh-day Adventist Church. The Colonial Chapel Funeral Home is handling the arrangements. Godwin, Dr. Charles Marion Godwin, aged 84. He was a veteran. He served in the Navy. He has several pages here. The celebration of life service will be held at 10 a.m. Friday the 13th at Good Shepherd Presbyterian Church of Lincoln. Aspen Cremation is in charge of the cremation services. Monetary memorials in his name can be made to the Good Shepherd Presbyterian Church Foundation of Lincoln or to the John Austin Chaley Foundation in Denver, Colorado. Hanson, Robert W. Hanson, 86, of Lincoln. He was a veteran of the U.S. Army and he served in Korea. Buttress, Mazer, and Love Funeral Home is in charge of arrangements. Graveside services will be at 11 o'clock Thursday at the Wyuka Cemetery, 3600 O Street in Lincoln. Memorials to the family for future designation. Havel, Bonnie Havel, age 62, of Lincoln. She was born in York. There will be a private funeral service 2 o'clock Friday at St. Patrick's Catholic Church in Lincoln, and graveside services at the Bohemian National Cemetery. Farmer and Son Funeral Home is in charge of arrangements. Helter, Robert Bob G. Helter, 80, of Hickman, has died. He was a veteran, and then he was in the National Guard. The memorial service, 11:30 a.m. Saturday, May 21st, at the Lincoln Memorial Funeral Home in Lincoln. Memorials to the Capital Humane Society of Lincoln or the Monarch Hospice Care of Lincoln. Kellogg, Betty Joanne Kellogg, aged 81, of Lincoln. Graveside services will be 11 o'clock Saturday at the Yankee Hill Cemetery, 1100 West Pioneers Boulevard in Lincoln. There will be no visitation. Condolences may be left at Trump Funeral Services, trumpmemorials.com, and they, of course, are handling the arrangements. Lebens, Patrick Edward Lebens of Omaha. Memorials are asked to the Special Olympics of Nebraska. Hefe is in charge of arrangements. There will be a visitation from 9:30 to 10:30 morning Friday, and services at 10:30, all at Hefe Hoffman Cutler, 51st and F Street in Omaha. Lyman, June Schoening Lyman, aged 81, of Lincoln. She was born in Mills County, Iowa. The celebration of her life will be held at 10 o'clock Saturday, the 14th, at Eastridge Presbyterian Church. Memorials to Eastridge Presbyterian Church, the Stephen Ministry, Tabitha Meals on Wheels, or St. Elizabeth Pastoral Care Department. Roper and Sons is in charge of arrangements. Martin, Fern Alice Martin, age 86, of Columbus. A memorial service will be held at a later date. Gass Haney is in charge of arrangements. Moore, Robert Dean Moore of Plattsmouth. He was 82 years old, and I don't have any other information. Moore, Carol V. Moore of Lincoln, age 75, and I also don't have any other information for her. Nelson, Richard L. Nelson, aged 81, of Lincoln, is born in Lincoln. The funeral services will be 10 o'clock Friday the 13th at Roper and Sons Chapel at 43rd and O Street. Memorials to the Eastmont Towers Foundation. Roper and Sons is in charge of arrangements. Eugene A. Olson, 82, of Utan. The funeral service will be at 2 o'clock Friday the 13th at the Riverview Community Church in Ashland. There will be a visitation at the Marcy Chapel in Ashland. Memorials to the Ashland Dog Pound Foundation and marcyswoboda.com to leave condolences. Rotschafer, Dale L. Rotschafer, age 65, of Lincoln. He served in the Navy and was a veteran, of course. Memorial service will be 11 o'clock on Saturday at South Point Christian Church in Lincoln. Memorials are suggested in lieu of flowers to the family's choice. Arrangements by Fusselman Allen Harvey Funeral Home. Jesse William Rowland, age 69, of Marysville, Kansas. Graveside services will be 2 p.m. Friday at the Randolph Fancy Creek Cemetery. Shawang, Schawang, Zelame Shawang of Falls City. She was 93 years old, and there's no further information. Scheit, Carol Lee Scheit, 83, of Lincoln. Celebration of her life will be at 1 o'clock Saturday the 14th at the Buthras, Mazer, and Love Funeral Home. Memorials to Brian Hart Institute in Carol's name. Sink, Betty Sue Marshall Sink of Lincoln. She was 73. The funeral services will be held at 10 o'clock at the Lincoln Memorial Funeral Home. Memorials can be made to the family. Stubendick, Wanda J. Ross Stubendick, age 86, of Lincoln. She had been born in Murdoch. Funeral service will be 11 a.m. Friday the 13th at First Plymouth Congregational Church. Memorials can be made to the First Plymouth Congregational Church Television Ministry or to the United Methodist Church of Nehawka. Roper and Sons is in charge of arrangements. Turner, Shirley Turner, age 66, of Geneva. That's all we know about that right now. Wagner Beck, Linda K. Wagner Beck, 66, of Lincoln. The funeral will be 10:30 in the morning, Saturday, at the Colonial Chapel Funeral Home. And Lincoln Funeral Home is in charge of arrangements. And finally, Wolven, Ardith Junge Wolven, I think, Junge, the maiden name. She was born in 1938. Funeral services will be at 10 o'clock on Saturday the 14th at Redeemer Lutheran Church. Buthras, Mazer, and Love is in charge of arrangements in Lincoln. Memorials are suggested to the Redeemer Lutheran Church.
And I'm reading the obituary announcements in the World Herald, today's World Herald. Adair, Glenn M. Adair, 84, funeral service Saturday, May 14th at 10 a.m. at First United Methodist Church. Kaler Dulce mortuary handling arrangements. Adelson, Alice Marie Mathis Adelson, 73 years of age. A memorial service is scheduled for 6:30 p.m. on Monday, May 16th at Bremen Mortuary Southwest Chapel. Memorial donations can be sent to the Nebraska Humane Society, Bremen Mortuary, 72nd Street Chapel, handling arrangements. Bodnar, Francis J. Bodnar, 94 years of age, World War II Navy veteran. Funeral will be held at Sacred Heart Church on Saturday, May 14th at 10 a.m. Vasilevek, Jeffrey Paul Vasilevek, 54 years of age. Celebration of life at 10 a.m. All at 10 a.m. at the West Lawn Hillcrest Funeral Home in Omaha and West Lawn Hillcrest Funeral Home handling arrangements. Burling, A.H. Buzz Burling, 73 years of age. Graveside service Saturday, 2:30 p.m. at Pleasant Hill Cemetery in Dunlap, Iowa. Memorials to UNMC Vascular Surgery Research. Heafy Hoffman, Dworak Cutler handling arrangements. Cerveny, Chris Standivan Cerveny, 71 years of age. Mass of Christian burial on Monday, May 16th at 10 a.m. St. Patrick Catholic Church. Heafy Hoffman, Dworak Cutler handling arrangements. Dean, Walter R. Dean, 78 years of age, veteran. Mass of Christian burial on Friday, 10:30 a.m., St. Vincent de Paul Catholic Church. Memorials to American Diabetes Association or Alzheimer's Association, and Heafy Hoffman, Dworak Cutler handling arrangements. Dickey, Pauline Elizabeth Dickey, 73, veteran. Graveside service on Friday, 10:30 a.m., Evergreen Memorial Park with military honors. Memorials will be directed by the family, and Heafy Hoffman, Dworak Cutler handling arrangements. Ekstrom, Peggy Ekstrom, 78 years of age, from Valley, Nebraska. A memorial service Friday, 11 a.m. at United Faith Community Church in Valley, and memorials to Make-A-Wish Foundation or the church, and Reichmuth Funeral Homes handling arrangements. Farron, Charlie R. Farron, 72 years of age. Complete notice will appear later. Heafy Hoffman, Dworak Cutler handling arrangements. Finney, Margaret Lynn Finney, 62 years of age. A private family memorial service will be held at a later date, and memorials are to go to the family. A suitable charity will be chosen at a later date. Roby Funeral Home of Plattsmouth handling arrangements. Garrison, Jerome D. Garrison, age 78, veteran. Originally, formerly of Fremont, but now of Omaha. Memorial service at 2 p.m. on Sunday. Ludvigsen Mortuary, a chapel in Fremont, and Ludvigsen Mortuary handling arrangements. Gass, Ronald N. Gass, 88, veteran. Reception on Saturday, May 14th at 12 noon in the Countryside Community Church Memorial Hall, and donations can be made to the Parkinson's Nebraska Association, the Crazy Horse Memorial Foundation, or a favorite charity of your choice. West Lawn Hillcrest Funeral Home handling arrangements. Gerhard, Anton J. Gerhard, 83, military veteran, Air Force veteran. Funeral service will be at 10 a.m. Saturday at the funeral home, and that funeral home is John A. Gentleman Mortuaries and Crematory, the 72nd Street Chapel. Hall, Tom Hall, 74, of Omaha. Memorial Mass will be held at 10 a.m. Friday, May 13th at St. Leo's. Memorials are suggested in his name to the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, Sienna Francis House, Gesu Housing, or St. Leo's Catholic Church. Harlow, Joan M. Harlow, 79 years of age. Holy Ghost, visitation at Holy Ghost Catholic Church, Mass of Christian burial there, and memorials to Nebraska Heart Association. Heafy Hoffman, Dworak Cutler handling arrangements. Hughes, Helen Hughes, 83, services are pending. Forest Lawn Funeral Home in charge of arrangements. Kanglor, Sharon R. Kanglor, 74, funeral mass 10:30 a.m. Friday at St. Wenceslas Catholic Church. Forest Lawn Funeral Home and Cemetery handling the arrangements. Coops, Sebastiana Nellie Brogna Olson, Coops, age 90. Funeral mass on Saturday at St. Robert Bellarmine Church. Complete notice later. Carisco Larkin Staskowitz Funeral Home handling arrangements. Lebert, Christine M. Warth Lebert, 52 years of age. Massive Christian burial on Friday at St. Robert Bellarmine Church. Memorials to Humphrey St. Francis School or St. Robert Bellarmine Church. Heaphy Hoffman, Doric Cutler, handling arrangements. Mach, M-A-C-H, Richard A. Mach from Castle Rock, Colorado, formerly of Omaha. Celebration of Life open house, 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. on Saturday at Community Bible Church Gymnasium. And donations are to go in Richard's memory to Narcolepsy Network. Manto, Irene M. Salmon Manto, 91 years of age. Mass of Christian burial Saturday, 10 a.m., St. Thomas More. Interment, Calvary Cemetery. Memorials to St. Thomas More Catholic Church. Heaphy Hoffman, Doric Cutler handling the arrangements. McKemmy, Donald Lyndon McKemmy, 69 years of age. Mass of Christian burial on Thursday, 10:30 a.m. at St. Pius X Catholic Church. Memorials will be directed by the family. Heaphy Hoffman, Doric Cutler handling arrangements. McQueen, Jennifer Sue McQueen, 56. Funeral service at 10 a.m. on Saturday at Bellevue Memorial Chapel. And memorials to the Kidney Cancer Organization or Grace Baptist Church of Papillion, Nebraska. Bellevue Memorial Chapel handling arrangements. O'Brien, Henry O'Brien, 67 years of age. Funeral Friday, 9:30 a.m. at Our Lady of Lourdes Church. Interment in Calvary Cemetery. Memorials to American Cancer Society. Heaphy Hoffman, Doric Cutler in charge of arrangements. Orchard, Mary Ann Orchard, age 86. Funeral Mass Friday, 11 a.m. at St. Bernadette Catholic Church. Carisco Larkin Staskowitz Funeral Home handling arrangements. Pesic, Valera Val Pesic, age 99 of Waterloo, Nebraska. Mass of Christian burial on Saturday, 10:30 a.m. at St. John's Catholic Church. Memorials to the church and Reichmuth Funeral Homes handling arrangements. Schaefer, Judith K. Schaefer, 78. Memorial service 11 a.m. Saturday, May 21st at Presbyterian Church of the Cross in Omaha. Let's see, memorial suggested to Presbyterian Church of the Cross, to Jocelyn Art Museum or the Ralston High School Food Bank. Arbor Cremation Society handling arrangements. Schuan, Robert L. Schuan, 79. Graveside service, 11 a.m. Friday. Resurrection Cemetery in Omaha. Memorial suggested to paralyzed veterans of America. John A. Gentleman Mortuaries and Crematory. Pacific Street Chapel handling arrangements. Sindelar, Dennis Dean Sindelar, 80 years of age, veteran. Funeral service at 11 a.m. Friday, both at Good Shepherd Funeral Home. Good Shepherd Funeral Home handling arrangements. Tilly, Stephen Craig Tilly, 64 years of age. Celebration of Life will be Thursday, May 12th, from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. at the Millard VFW post number 8334. John A. Gentleman Mortuaries and Crematory, Bellevue, Sarpy County Chapel in charge. Walker, Constance Walker, age 65. Kramer Funeral Home handling arrangements. Widholm, Teresa Rita Widholm, 84. Complete notice later. Heaphy Hoffman, Doric Cutler handling arrangements. Youngman, Linda Youngman, 77. Services Saturday, May 21st at 10 a.m. Lutheran Church of the Master East Campus. Complete notice later. And Heaphy Hoffman, Doric Cutler in charge of arrangements. And that was the final obituary. Listeners' memorials to the Radio Talking Book Network are tax deductible and will go a long way in keeping Radio Talking Book on the air. Please keep Radio Talking Book in mind when memorials are listed as donor's choice or your favorite charity. Donations should be sent to Radio Talking Book Network, 7101 Newport Avenue, Suite 205, Omaha, Nebraska, 68152. And thank you for being a Radio Talking Book Network listener and supporter. we've reached the halfway point in our reading tonight. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be back with editorials, with entertainment, and with sports.
All right. Well, that brings us right
I
to
sure
a
blew
break.
that, didn't I?
And then we'll
Time
be right
wise.
back to your library.
It doesn't matter, I don't think.
I've never heard any complaints.
I have a couple of letters to the editor, which I can read. One of them is how dangerous it is to own a gun, and one about how old should a person be before he's in court.
What's that?
Movies.
Oh. So what was the first one you mentioned?
This first letter is don't treat young adults as teenagers. He talks, apparently there's an earlier article, and then this man says, all the science says that people are not really adults until they get into their 20s. So this is he says his final thing is this is a political judgment, not science, when we decide that 18 is the cutoff. And then there's one about, I'm referring to the fact that 4 toddlers were killed in 1 week by guns and all this. Best, government's not going to do anything about it, so the best thing is for you to take action and don't have it.
I heard today, maybe you heard too, that the fellow in Florida that shot that young man was putting his gun out for sale.
I saw that.
But
Auction,
yeah, but on the way out here, I heard that it had been, the auction company won't handle it.
That's all right with me.
Yeah, I thought so too. Isn't that awful?
And if you do enjoy it, or you can't get to the radio on Saturday, it is repeated on Sunday at 3:30 p.m. in the afternoon. So you have 2 opportunities.
Well, I'm going to read the editorial because it's this big question about the Nebraska Tourism Commission.
I think that's a good idea. Yes, by all means, read that.
I will.
Would you like to do the public pulse, and then I'll do these, and you do that?
Well, that brings us to
Why don't you go ahead and
radio.
start
Okay.
first?
Remember that
Okay,
this is
so
a radio
this-
talking book
This
network.
is the-
Your print information network serving Nebraska and its neighboring states. The Radio Talking Book Network is brought to you in cooperation from
And this goes until 7:20, probably a little bit longer because of the way I botched it up.
It's time to go back to your live reading place. So I'm going to hand it on over to our reading teacher and get started on the reading for you.
Thank you. It's time for the letters to the editors and the editorials, and I have a couple of letters here that were written to the New York Times. The first one says, of course, to the editor. It's from Jeffrey Butts, who is the Director of Research and Evaluation Center at John Jay College of Criminal Justice in New York. He says, don't treat young adults as teenagers, which is an article that appeared earlier, pardon me, by Lawrence Steinberg, Thomas Grissow, Elizabeth S. Scott, and Richard J. Bonney in the Sunday Review of it in the Times, of course, on May 1st, opposes a positive trend in justice policy. The writers, all accomplished scholars, support the 19th century idea that legal distinctions between children and adults may be determined using a single magic birthday. They prefer to define adulthood at 18 rather than 21. But why not 16 or 19? Lawmakers in Connecticut, Illinois, and Vermont are trying to end this 19th century thinking and to bring their legal systems in line with modern science, showing that young people acquire adult-like judgment gradually during the teenage years and well into the early 20s. The writers acknowledge this body of science, yet for some reason they place a greater value on administrative convenience. Managing a truly developmental justice system, they argue, would just be too arduous. Instead, they settle for magic birthdays, with 18 as the decisive demarcation. This is a political judgment, not science. Again, that's from Jeffrey Butts, the Director of Research and Evaluation Center at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. And then I have at least one more letter here, if I can only find it. The topic is toddlers with guns. To the editor, guns in tiny hands. In a week, 4 toddlers shoot themselves, that was on the front page May 6th, highlights the tragic folly of keeping a firearm for self-protection. Children are not the only victims. Statistics consistently show that the probability of shooting a friend or a relative far exceeds the probability of shooting an intruder or an assailant. Moreover, the majority of firearm-related deaths in this country are suicides. A person who attempts suicide with, for instance, an overdose of sleeping pills is often rescued, while a person who attempts suicide with a gun is nearly always successful. In today's climate, it is unlikely that a public policy initiative will emerge to address these tragedies. The best strategy that a person can adopt to avoid a gun-related disaster is not to own a gun. That's from Daniel S. Blumenthal of Carlisle, Pennsylvania. The writer is the president of the American College of Preventive Medicine.
Okay, and I have today's editorial in the Omaha World Herald, and this particular issue has been in the news quite a bit of late. It's headlined "A Question of Oversight." The state agency in charge of getting people interested in Nebraska now needs to show its interest in the taxpayers of Nebraska. The Nebraska Tourism Commission has formed a special committee to investigate how its finances went so far astray. A string of questionable expenses ranging from paying a convention speaker $44,000 to going $4.4 million over budget on an advertising contract. Nebraskans deserve answers. Questions abound. Here are a few for the 9 members of the Tourism Commission's governing board. First, state law spells out commission members' duties, including preparing and approving budgets, hiring an executive director, contracting for services, and authorizing spending. Did you exercise sufficient responsibility in those areas? Next, for the hired help, particularly the Commission's Executive Director, Kathy McKillop. Next, did you know about and approve of the expenses highlighted by State Auditor Charlie Jansen, the $4.4 million ad contract overrun, loss of $84,000 on a convention, free massages, reimbursement for alcohol and cigarettes, and ad agency's hiring of McKillop's daughter, double reimbursement for use of McKillop's car, payment of $18,000 in moving expenses for one employee. Next, why were no firm fiscal policies and procedures adopted in the nearly 4 years the commission has been an independent agency? Next, with Governor Pete Ricketts, former Governor Dave Heineman, and 2 major travel organizations calling for McKillop's ouster, should she stay? The weaknesses revealed by the state auditor's office raised other concerns. The governor, who appoints the Tourism Commission members, and the legislature also need to ask some questions. Next, should the Tourism Commission remain an independent agency, as it has been since 2012, or should it be under the governor's direct control, perhaps by returning it to the State Department of Economic Development? Next, does the state offer newly created agencies sufficient direction and training to ensure sound fiscal management of taxpayer dollars? Should it require upfront that such agencies contract assistance from the Department of Administrative Services? Next, should the makeup of the Tourism Commission's governing board, now heavily tilted toward industry representatives, be revised? Should it include a state senator or others with a more extensive background in state government finance? This is a serious matter. Some are already questioning whether the state even needs to be in the tourism promotion business. But tourism has a real economic impact, contributing more than $650 million a year to the state's economy. The commission's role is to give these efforts coordinated direction statewide. While McKillop has been praised as a great promoter of Nebraska events, her defense of these spending missteps dismays. The concept is, if the money is there, to utilize it. That's a quote. State officials cannot treat taxpayers like an ATM. Nebraskans looking at this agency's spending have good reason to shake their heads and wonder who's watching the store. Cost overruns, expensive speaker fees, free massages, and more have rattled public trust. Addressing these questions can begin restoring it.
Thank you.
Have you got something more there? Do you want me to do some
I would
letters?
do some letters, I
Okay,
think.
I will. Here's something that my wife always complains about. A bad way to warn of bad weather. Am I the only person? No, this person is not the only person who has a problem with the National Weather Service using mile markers and roads to report the location of sudden serious conditions. I understand doing this when it can use interstate highways to identify where a storm is. We are familiar with the mile markers on those roads and exits. However, most maps do not show mile markers for most roads. It would seem wise for the Weather Service to use towns as reference points, not mile markers. In bad weather, time is of the essence. That was written by Richard F. Behrens from Omaha. Let's see. Here's somebody who's very positive. Voting was a breeze is the little headline. I was so happy to read Aaron Grace's column about Drew Davies, an expert in making voting simpler. A clean ballot for messy times was the headline from that story in the May 10th World Herald. My husband and I voted early, and I have been wanting to thank someone for the clearest instructions I've ever received on how to vote and return your ballot. Perhaps Drew Davies is responsible. That was written by Betty Barnard from Omaha. Let's see. Here's somebody who says, let's see. Shall I read something about Trump?
Oh, certainly.
Trump is no Republican, someone says. I don't get it. By what reasoning do those calling for House Speaker Paul Ryan and Senator Ben Sasse to board the Trump Express base their opinion? Seems to me that Donald Trump is neither a conservative nor a Republican. What is this magical thinking that nomination in hand, he will suddenly adhere to conservative Republican thinking when his actions and position on the issues to date have resembled Hillary Clinton more than any Republican? Trump's actions and words on such issues as trade, taxes, regulation, welfare, judicial nominees, and social and foreign policy are more clearly aligned with the Democratic Party than they are with conservatism. The best hope for the Republican Party and conservatism is a one-term Hillary Clinton presidency. We'll be able to survive a liberal president who is held in check for 4 years by a Republican Congress far more easily than will weather a Trump presidency. The stain he will put on the Republican Party will last a generation. If you want to vote for Trump, fine, vote for Trump. Just don't call him a Republican. That is written by Steve Collins from Omaha. And just a little bit on the other side, opponents quickly change their tunes. It amazes me how nearly all of the candidates for the Republican presidential nomination criticized Donald Trump for his outrageous views on race, religion, and gender, and his lack of foreign policy knowledge. But now that he is seemingly assured of the Republican nomination, they are now rushing to any microphone to gush about how great he is. How do these people sleep at night? That was written by Dale Rizak from Omaha.
All right, thanks. It's time enough, I think, for us to turn to today's living and entertainment.
Something later.
In the Times, this story is called Untreatable. At the beginning of the 20th century, sick Americans typically died at home. By the middle of it, they mostly died in hospitals. And yet this great transformation in the geography of death was at first of little interest to medical providers. In the 1960s, some doctors routinely chose not to inform terminal patients of their fate. Studies found hospitals stashing dying people at the ends of halls and largely ignoring them. Medicine, it was said, was about healing people. It had nothing to offer the already dying. That began to change with the broad acceptance of hospice, which spread in the United States during the 1970s and 1980s and turned the innovations of modern medicine toward helping those whose cures were beyond its reach. The physician named Cicely Saunders founded the first modern clinic in London. The term hospice had first been used by old sanctuaries for weary travelers. Sanctuary, says the photographer Gillian Laub, is what she and her family found at Rosary Hill Home in Hawthorne, New York, a hamlet in Westchester County. Laub's mother-in-law was suffering from terminal cancer, and her insurance would not cover the 24-hour care she required. So they took her to Rosary, which is run by Catholic nuns and accepts no payment from the families of those they treat, all of them with incurable cancer. Rosary, which sits on a hill above the town, was founded in 1901, long before the mainstream medical community embraced hospice care, and during a time when some doctors still thought cancer was contagious. Although it still treats only the terminally ill, Rosary is not technically considered a hospice in New York because, among other things, it accepts patients too early. The nuns, who are members of the Dominican order, care for those of all religions and backgrounds. Laub's mother-in-law was Jewish and lived by the prescient words of its founder, Rose Hawthorne Lathrop, a daughter of Nathaniel Hawthorne. We cannot cure our patients, but we can assure the dignity and value of their final days and keep them comfortable and free of pain. The Hawthorne Dominicans also operate similar homes in Atlanta and Philadelphia. As the nuns cared for their guests, Laub followed them with her camera. It's her way. Then, even after her mother-in-law died in late September, she found herself returning to Rosary again and again, still wanting to capture something of the kindness that her family had found there. She asked the nuns to sit for portraits, in which she stripped away the background to show their eyes and faces in clear focus. I wanted them to be quiet, she said, so their power could come through. The nuns in particular had moved her. She was struck by their tenderness with the dying, how they painted women's fingernails and combed their hair, changed them into fresh nightgowns, and arranged flowers in their rooms. This is how dying doesn't feel like a place of death. It feels like a place of living. And I will just say, of the two portraits that we can see here, one is of a 31-year-old woman and one is a much older woman, perhaps 70. They are sitting peacefully and they have little smiles and they look entirely peaceful.
Okay, very good. Well, this is a lot lighter than that. It's Amy Dickinson's column. She says, I stepped away from my column for a week while I put the finishing touches on my new book, which will be published in the fall. Please enjoy these best of columns in my absence. I'll be back with your fresh questions and answers next week. So here's a kind of a strange one. Dear Amy, the other night, my large family, 7 children, plus my wife and I, went to dinner at a local restaurant. We made reservations for a family of 9. Upon our arrival, we had to wait for the table to be set up. As we were waiting, my children were eager to be seated. As the waiter came to seat us, I overheard a patron saying to the hostess, please don't seat them by us, meaning my children. I went back to the waiting area and confronted this man. I asked him if there was a problem with my children, that he didn't want to sit by them. When the hostess saw me confront this man, she ushered me to the table, saying that everything was okay. Everything was not okay. I wanted to leave, but my wife didn't want to make a scene. Was I wrong to react as I did? Signed, Proud New York Dad. Her answer is kind of interesting. Dear Proud, I have a confession to make. I don't want to be seated next to your children either. Much of the time, I don't want to be seated with my own. Your children are lovely, I'm sure, but picture this. I've just hired a sitter, leaving my own kids at home to have a rare, intimate dinner with my spouse. I don't want to sit next to your children. Or I've just scored a meeting with my client who's passing through town. I don't want to sit next to your children. Or I've got my elderly mother with me and she doesn't hear too well. Yep, no kids for me, please. You say you overheard this gentleman speaking to the hostess. I assume he didn't deliberately direct his comment to you. You shouldn't have confronted him. I would even say that in this instance, you set a poor example for your children. If I had been your dinner partner, I would have suggested that you might want to simmer down and let the restaurant hostess do her job in order to enjoy your own evening out. Here's another one. Dear Amy, I've been married for more than 17 years. My husband has worked throughout those 17 years, but he has never worked consistently on any one job for more than a year. On the other hand, I have kept and maintained the same job with the same company for 20 years. I even have a part-time job. How do I get my husband to look for more serious employment so that when we retire, we can have more than just my retirement to live on? I've never been able to take a real vacation. Don't say that I should talk to him about it. Done that. Don't say that I should try to find others who are in the position to help him out, because I've done that. Don't say that I should find a job for him to apply for, because I've also done that. Signed, Tired and Weary. Dear Tired, I love it when people surgically remove my ideas before I even have a chance to suggest them. Now I've got to get creative. I'm going to suggest the hardest thing of all. It doesn't involve your changing or fixing your husband. My suggestion is that you either figure out what he does well and appreciate him for that, or mosey along. Does your husband maintain the home, do yard work, or volunteer in the community? Does he maintain the car, cook, and do housework? If you have children, is he a good father? If you are not able to change the way you feel about the balance in your marriage or about your husband's contributions to your family, then you should consider leaving the relationship. A therapist could help you sort this out. Marriage counseling was not on your list of things I can't suggest. It might work for you. Well, she was pulling no punches tonight.
I'll say. That's right. Well, here's an article about money left behind. The headline says the TSA collected over $760,000 in unclaimed cash at airports. Embracing the concept of keep the change, the Transportation Security Administration said it collected more than $760,000 in unclaimed cash, mostly loose coins, from travelers who had forgotten the money after passing through airport security in the 2015 fiscal year. The agency said it makes every effort to reunite passengers with items left at the checkpoint, but at times, property or loose change, I've lost my place again, go unclaimed. The coins, for instance, were left behind when passengers emptied their pockets before going through metal detectors. Money from other countries collected over the fiscal year, which ended September 30th, made up more than $9,200, which was converted to American currency, according to the TSA report in March. What will the agency do with the money? In 2005, Congress gave the TSA the authority to use unclaimed money on security operations. The money came from 114 so-called hub airports, central airports through which flights are routed. Money collected at smaller airports, which are connected to hubs via routes known as spokes, turn over the money they collect to their respective hub. In the New York metropolitan area, Kennedy International Airport reported the highest total of unclaimed funds, $43,715.81. LaGuardia Airport reported $23,413.61, and Newark Liberty International Airport raked in $12,846.78. The lowest amount collected at a hub airport was $1.99 at Pago Pago International Airport in American Samoa, according to TSA figures. USA Today, which reported on the unclaimed money, said that some airports had installed kiosks for passengers to deposit spare change for charitable causes. Denver International Airport collects money for a program to help homeless people, and Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport accepts donations to support a United Service Organizations program for members of the military and their families. John Dedell, a video conferencing designer from Safety Harbor, Florida, said he flew about once a month for business and puts his loose change in a backpack for safekeeping. It really does not surprise me that people leave loose change behind, he said in an email. People seem to leave all kinds of things, and I don't think there has ever been a trip that I didn't hear, will the person who left come back to TSA to retrieve it? The combination of fewer TSA screeners, tighter budgets, new checkpoint procedures, and more passengers has already created long lines at airports around the country. Money left unclaimed has nearly doubled to $765,759.15 in the 20 fiscal year, from $383,413.79 in 2008 fiscal year, the TSA report showed. The sum has increased every year except for one since 2008. Look for more loose change to be left behind this summer as air travel reaches its peak. Officials warn of extraordinarily long lines to get through security, which might mean more anxious passengers dashing for their gates and forgetting to pick up their money.
Okay, here is a story I'm fascinated by. I've heard about it in the last few days. It's Transportation Meet the Future. And this is transportation by, remember those, I always remember going to the Brandeis store and they had those vacuum tubes that sent immense, I don't know what they sent.
Money, they sent money up to be
From
deposited.
one place to another.
And they made a noise.
Yes, they did. And now they're thinking of that as a method of transportation. A company that hopes to zip people and cargo through tubes at hundreds of miles an hour provided a glimpse of its propulsion system for the first time Wednesday in North Las Vegas. The seconds-long outdoor demonstration by Hyperloop One featured what appeared to be a blip of metal gliding across a small track before disappearing into a cloud against the desert landscape. Developers say it could whisk people from Los Angeles to San Francisco in 30 minutes, whereas it would normally take about 6 hours by car, and could be as revolutionary to transportation as the internet has been to society. The California-based company said a full-scale, full-speed test of its technology, including not just the motor, but also the tubes, levitation, and the car that travels inside the tubes, could come by the end of this year. If you're unfamiliar with the high-speed Hyperloop concept initially devised by Elon Musk, it goes like this. Someday you might be able to step into a kind of subway car that levitates on a small cushion of air. Excuse me. And then when the car closes, all or most of the other air is taken out of the tunnel, reducing the drag and friction that would otherwise build up in front of the car. One of the most important parts of this notional machine is the electric motor that sucks excess air from the front of the car and transfers it to the rear. Executive Bob Lloyd, the motor was custom designed and tailored specifically for the project. The amount of energy it uses, the way we control the pulses, the copper coils, everything is unique, Lloyd said. There's no other motor in the world that uses this amount of energy in an instant fashion, turning it on and turning it off. Of course, the real Hyperloop won't have tracks at all, but as a proof of concept, Hyperloop Tech said Wednesday's demonstration represented a taste of what's to come. This is a full-scale component. This is the technology, Lloyd said. Hyperloop One is one of several companies trying to build the first functional Hyperloop. For instance, it's in a race against Hyperloop Transportation Technologies, which is doing its testing in California, and on Monday unveiled its passive levitation technology, which allows the transportation pod to float only while it's moving, theoretically improving safety. I don't want to be the first one to try that.
No, I don't think so. The title of this article is Men Have Book Clubs Too. There's a picture of about 12 men sitting around the table, and they have some kind of pretty fancy looking soup and some wine and so forth. None of the men in the Man Book Club had a problem with the bull castration scene in The Power of the Dog, the 1967 novel by Thomas Savage. But more than one member of this all-male reading group in Marin County, California, got squeamish when the host announced that the taco appetizers he had prepared that night were filled with ground-up Rocky Mountain oysters, that is, animal testicles. The fun part was looking at the expression, said the club's founder, Andrew McCullough, 53. Some guys had real difficulty swallowing. I kept eating. I have standards I need to adhere to as secretary and founder. The Man Book Club is going into its 9th year. It has 16 members, a number of whom are lawyers and engineers in their mid-50s. Each month, the host must prepare a meal appropriate to the book under discussion. Oh, well, no wonder. There was an 8-course French supper to accompany Henry Miller's Tropic of Cancer, and a meal of refined comfort food presented on TV trays for Bill Bryson's 1950s era memoir, The Life and Times of the Thunderbolt Kid. I was always a little jealous of my wife's book clubs, Mr. McCullough said. Now our wives are jealous of us. We've created something that is more durable. The book club my wife belongs to, there's a lot of changeover. Women, it seems, can afford to drop in and out of reading groups. In its 2011 survey of voluntary organizations, the Pew Research Center found that 11% of Americans were active in literary discussion or study groups such as book clubs, and that women were more than twice as likely to take part in such gatherings as men were. Perhaps because participation in reading groups is perceived as a female activity, some all-male book clubs have an outsized need to proclaim the endeavor's masculinity. In addition to going by the name of the Man Book Club, for instance, Mr. McCullough's group expresses its notion of manliness through the works it chooses to read. We do not read so-called chick lit, he said. The main character cannot be a woman. This is detailed in the Man Book Club's criteria on the group's website. No books by women about women. The members of the club rate books on a scale of 1 to 10. The leader, with a score of 8.8, is Nobody's Fool by Richard Russo. The lowest rated book at 3.3 is Oscar and Lucinda by Peter Carey. Another all-male reading group, this one with a name even more insistently macho than that of the Man Book Club, is the International Ultra Manly Book Club of Kansas City, Kansas. It started with a group of college friends, and its website hammers home its He-Man identity through prominent images of Chuck Norris, Dwayne Johnson, better known as The Rock, and Oprah Winfrey, standing before an Oprah's Book Club logo beneath the legend, "Not Your Mother's Book Club." Unlike the Marin County group, the International Ultra Manly Book Club is not big on the dinner party element. When one of its members does bring food to one of the monthly get-togethers, it tends to be manly, like spicy, said John Krieger, 32, one of the regulars. In explaining the club's purpose, the International Ultra Manly Book Club website makes explicit the notion that men take literature as seriously as women. The About Us section said it was founded in part on the vision that one day we could step out of the shadow of our mother's book clubs and proclaim that, yes, we too are intellectuals. If that mission statement seems a tad defensive, there are indeed women who treat book clubs as entities that lie beyond the masculine sphere. 2 years ago, Edward Nawotka, 44, a writer and editor in Houston, was out for drinks with the guys from his reading group, the Houston Men's Book Club, when a woman started hitting on its president. She asked how we knew each other, and when we said book club, she was like, "Wait, are you gay?" Mr. Nawotka said. He added that he and the woman ended up dating. He said he understood her reaction. Fiction is designed to examine empathy, Mr. Nawotka said. Men aren't encouraged to talk about their feelings or emotions in public. When your friend gets divorced, you don't sit around with the guys wondering, how do you think John feels about getting divorced? But over discussions of Jose Saramago, Haruki Murakami, and Anthony Doerr, the 15 members of his group have formed a bond. We've each seen each other through family tragedies, Mr. Nawotka said. When I needed a divorce attorney, I turned to these guys. And when the founding member's wife died from cancer, all the club members attended the funeral. John Tomlinson is the founder of the NYC Gay Guys Book Club, which meets at the Jefferson Market Library in New York City and has 1,200 members in its meetup.com group. Anywhere from 10 to 60 men show up at the monthly meetings. People come to connect, to find their place in a new city, to fall in love, Mr. Tomlin said. Especially popular NYC Gay Guys Book Club novels have included Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin, A Single Man by Christopher Isherwood, and The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt, Mr. Tomlinson said.
Okay, here's a piece that is written under the momaha.com byline, and it's written by Rachel Higginson, a married mom to 4 kids, ages 3 to 9. She wrote this guest piece for momaha.com. She lives in Omaha. Higginson is an author who has received a Utopia Award for Best Contemporary Romance and a PEN Award for Best Novella Series. She says, "My 5-year-old looked at me the other day with as much fury and frustration as 5-year-olds are capable and yelled, 'Don't say just a minute. I don't want to hear just a minute.' He'd asked me to do something for him again. It was probably the 3rd time he'd asked in the last 10 minutes, and frankly, he was tired of asking. Honestly, I can't blame him. He's 5. He hasn't quite grasped the virtue of patience, and his concept of time is somewhat lacking. If it were the first time it had happened, I would have laughed him off or lectured him with my best, business voice. But it wasn't the first time, nor was he the first kid to complain about my lack of attention. Do I sound like the worst mom ever? I'm not. Instead, I'm a new breed of mom. I'm the kind of mom who's juggling deadlines and potty training, the mom who is scheduling conference calls around nap time and school pickup. I'm balancing after-school activities and answering emails and class parties and social media obligations and a million other things all at once. I am the work-from-home mom. The internet has created this epic opportunity for moms of little ones to stay at home and still bring in an income for their families. I am just one of many moms who have decided to run a business from the chaos and clutter of their homes. And while we can rejoice in the opportunities open to us from the comfort of our couch and day-old yoga pants, it's not exactly as easy as it sounds. With little ones hanging on our legs and dishes piling in the sink, sometimes it's easy to forget that we're sacrificing for our family as we focus on the mounting stress and unfinished tasks. Our kids run wild while we desperately pray to finish just one task. Our houses fall into disrepair while we struggle to keep our businesses organized. Meal plans and budgets are pushed to the background while deadlines loom. And our massive workload fights with our children for our attention. Sometimes I drive by office buildings and dreamily look inside, imagining my working hours spent tucked away in an office with four walls and a closed door that people respect. I picture 8 glorious hours of quiet solitude where I'm expected to focus on work. Meanwhile, my husband has twice today gently suggested that I shower, and my 3-year-old destroyed an hour of work that I can't get back. Working from home can be overwhelming and stressful. The gray hairs hiding under my blonde highlights tell the story of missed deadlines, forgotten school pictures, and 4 children who don't understand why my computer is monopolizing all my attention. And yet it's worth it, isn't it? As often as I complain, I wouldn't give up those stolen cuddles in between projects and phone calls. I can't regret a single last party I volunteered for, even if my deadlines suffer. I can daydream about peace and quiet, but I wouldn't trade my desk full of crayon-colored pictures and action figures for any corner office in the world. Even if I'm overwhelmed, I have to admit that I actually have the best of both worlds, and I wouldn't trade working from home for anything.
I am in trouble now because my computer has sort of frozen. But turning to the business section of the New York Times, the headline says, "Young without degree or prospects." The article is by a woman called Patricia Cohen. For seniors graduating from the University of Michigan this month, employers have been lining up since the fall to offer interviews and boast of their company's benefits. Recruiters would ask when their competitors were coming, said Jeannie Harklerode, the university's assistant director of employer development, and they say, well, we want to come the week before. This has been one of our largest seasons of hiring, she said. The job market has been very good. The outlook for many high school graduates is more challenging, as Vinnie Brown can attest. Now 20, he graduated 2 years ago from Waller High School in Texas and has been working for nearly a year at Papacito's Cantina in Houston, part of a chain of Tex-Mex restaurants. He earns $7.25 an hour, filling takeout hours, or $2.13 an hour plus tips as a server, which rarely adds up to more than the minimum, he said. He would like to apply to be a manager, but those jobs require some college experience. That is something I don't have, said Mr. Brown, who says he cannot afford to go to college now. It's the biggest struggle I've had. Most young workers have the same problem as Mr. Brown. Only 10% of 17 to 24-year-olds have college or advanced degree, according to a new study by the Economic Policy Institute, although many more of them will eventually graduate. And for young high school graduates, the unemployment rate is a disturbingly high, 17.8%. Add in those who are underemployed, either because they would like a full-time job but can only find part-time work, or they are so discouraged that they've given up actively searching, and the share jumps to more than 33%. Younger workers have always had a tougher time in finding a job than their older, more experienced counterparts, Even so, the economic recovery has progressed more slowly for young high school graduates than for those coming out of college. It's improved since the recession, but it's still pretty poor, said Elise Gould, a senior economist at the Economic Policy Institute, who noted the average hourly wage for high school graduates has declined since 2000, despite increases in the minimum wage in some places. Ms. Gould is a part of a growing chorus of economists, employers, and educators who argue more effort needs to be put into improving job prospects for people without college degrees. Without question, we have failed to pay attention to and invest in opportunities for young people who are not on a path to go to 4 years of college, said Chauncey Lennon, the head of the workforce initiatives at J.P. Morgan Chase, which has started a $75 million program to design and deliver career-focused education in high schools and community colleges. For high school students, a 4-year college education is frequently held out as the only viable option, precisely because the job opportunities and wages are so much better upon graduation. But many who sign up never finish. The most common reason they fail to complete is that they need to start earning a living to support their families, Mr. Lennon said. Vocational, career, and technical high schools have often been stigmatized as a last resort for underachievers. At the same time, educators and administrators in some places have been criticized for steering minority students toward them in lieu of academic programs. The initiative, sponsored by Chase, is aimed at repairing that reputation, although some traditional middle skills opportunities for construction and clerical workers are shrinking. Mr. Lennon said others are growing in healthcare, for instance. Radiology and phlebotomy technicians are needed. In advanced manufacturing and aviation, mechanical maintenance workers are in demand. He added that vocational schools should no longer be thought of as dead ends, since they can serve as stepping stones to associate degrees at community colleges or to enrollment at 4-year institutions.
Okay, let's take a look at some sports news before we leave tonight. And this may kind of surprise you, but there's a story in here about Creighton basketball. That seems like a long way off. But Creighton is going to lose a transfer. Albert decides to transfer with playing time in doubt at CU. A desire for more playing time as a senior has led guard Malik Albert to leave Creighton. Coach Greg McDermott said Wednesday that Albert, an athletic backup guard, informed him of his decision shortly before most Creighton players returned home for a month off before the start of summer conditioning. I think Malik looked at the roster and realized that playing time would be an even bigger issue this year than last season, McDermott said. We have a lot of guys back and we're adding some more. We would have loved for Malik to stay around. He's a great kid, but it all came down to playing time. He wants more, and that wasn't guaranteed to happen. We will do everything we can to find him a place to play. Albert played one season for the Blue Jays, joining the program in midsummer of 2015. He played 2 seasons at Mott Community College in Flint, Michigan, averaging almost 25 points a game as a sophomore. He had to sit out the 2014-15 season to take care of academic issues. Creighton then signed him, partly as insurance, with several guards nursing injuries last summer. As a junior, the 6'2" Albert averaged 8 minutes while coming off the bench in 27 games for the Blue Jays. He averaged 2.6 points, 1 assist, and 1 rebound per game. He scored a career-high 13 points against Coppin State in the final non-conference game and had 10 assists in a November 17th win over Texas San Antonio. Albert spent most of the season backing up Maurice Watson at point guard, but some of his best minutes came at shooting guard late in the season when starter Isaiah Zierden missed time because of a shoulder injury. Albert made 11 of 18 shots in scoring 23 points in a 3-game span to close the regular season. His season ended when he injured an ankle in an NIT win over Wagner. Some of Malik's best moments came when he was running alongside Maurice, as opposed to when he was backing him up. McDermott said that potentially would have been a problem this year. Creighton loses only one backcourt player, James Milliken, off this season's 20-win team. Zierden is expected back after recovering from shoulder surgery, and the Blue Jays will have Marcus Foster, considered one of the nation's top transfers after playing 2 seasons at Kansas State. There will be some huge expectations on Marcus, McDermott said, but we feel he can handle all of them. The playing time he'll get would leave a guy like Malik less time than more. Freshman point guard Davian Mintz also could cut into Albert's playing time. Most minutes at that spot will go to Watson, who earned second-team All-Big East honors as a junior. Mintz, a 6'4", 3-star combo guard from North Carolina, is expected to see backup action at the point. We feel Davion will be capable of handling what we throw at him, McDermott said. He's a player who is hungry on getting better, and he's doing everything to do that. Added together, the opportunity for Malik to play might not have been as great as last season. I can't blame him for wanting to play more, especially in his last year. Considering Albert had to sit out a lot last season, his options might be limited to playing at the Division II level. Right now, that doesn't matter, McDermott said. He just wants to play.
Here's a story from the Times, a sports story. The headline says, no souvenir, but a memory to keep and a story to tell. One of the beauties of baseball people will tell you, is that there is always a chance you'll see something at the ballpark that day that you've never seen before. This always struck me as a rationalization for the countless hours, days, months, years that are given away to the game. Okay, wasted, as if there aren't more satisfying pursuits. When the San Antonio Spurs were in New York last year as the Kansas City Royals beat the Mets at Citi Field to win the World Series, a reporter asked Spurs coach Greg Popovich if he had seen the game. Popovich was incredulous. Sports were boring, he said, so why would he waste a night in the city watching a baseball game when he could be enjoying a bottle of wine and a fine meal with friends? I remember being down with that. But then there I was late Tuesday night at Yankee Stadium in the right field seats trying to get a different perspective on the entrance of the flame-throwing reliever Aroldis Chapman into the game. As Chapman began to warm up in the Yankees bullpen, which is also in right field, reliever Andrew Miller entered the game in the 8th inning to try to protect the Yankees' lead. Miller had been the team's closer until Chapman's return on Monday from a suspension, and he had not allowed a run all season. A crack of the bat. I looked to the field and saw 2 outfielders running toward me. Then I saw the ball. Yep, I thought that's going to clear the fence. It was Lorenzo Cain's 3rd home run of the night, something he had never done at any level. Several fans raced down the aisle to try to catch it, but the ball bounced off their hands, went up several rows, caromed off a wall, and rolled to a stop right at my feet. I reached down and picked it up. I had caught a baseball at a game before, one hit by a Molina, while my wife and children were getting hot dogs. They had to ask every fan around us before they believed me. But I had never gotten my hands on a home run. I looked at the ball for a moment and thought, cool, my son will dig this. The thought was fleeting. Within a few seconds, the chant started, throw it back. I realized I had a problem. Having grown up a Cubs fan, I was well aware of the tradition at some parks of throwing home runs hit by opposing hitters back onto the field. I believe it started at Wrigley Field. But I was sitting there with a media credential around my neck. How would it look if I threw it back? And as the chants grew louder, the Bronx was in full throat. Waiting out the crowd did not seem wise either. It was devolving into something a reporter would rather avoid. I was becoming a part of the story. I had to think quickly. Unfortunately, this is not a strong suit. I'm forever walking away from interviews thinking about the brilliant follow-up question that just popped into my mind. When Kobe Bryant made fun of a fedora I was wearing, his ankle was fine, but my hat was killing him. I just laughed along with everyone else. On the way out of the locker room, I realized this was the guy who once did a ridiculous fashion spread wearing all white. Darn. 2 seats to my right was a boy sitting with his father. I couldn't throw the ball back, and I couldn't keep it. So I reached over and put it in his glove. A few knuckleheads then got on the kid to throw the ball back, but they were quickly drowned out. As it turned out, Caleb, 14, had flown in from Miami in the morning with his father, Felix Tejeda, who was taking him to his first Yankees game. They had toured the stadium in the morning and were flying home Wednesday in time for Felix to work his night shift as a manager in an industrial laundry business. Felix told me what the tickets and airfare had cost him and said it was just like the credit card commercial. The smile on his face is priceless, he said, nodding to Caleb. 20 or 30 years from now, that's all he'll remember. Later in the clubhouse, when Miller finished his interviews, I told him I had caught the ball, a loose summary of events to be sure. You can give it to him, Miller said, referring to Kane. I told Miller I'd given the ball to a fan, but that did not cheer him up. It's unfortunate, he said. I wish I didn't give up a souvenir. Miller at least could take comfort in the Yankees' eventual victory, something Kane said took the luster off his night. But for all involved, the guy who threw the ball, the one who hit it, the one who caught it, and the boy who took it home, there was a similar appreciation. What happened Tuesday night doesn't happen every day.
That's a great story. Okay, I've got a story here on Nebraska volleyball, one of my favorite sports. And the headline reads, Skype brings sweet news for NU pledge. The phone call Aneska Zabu had wanted for 3 years never came. Instead, the good news was delivered via Skype, and it didn't take long for the high school junior to say yes. Her name is Szabo, Zabo, I assume, accepted a scholarship offer Monday to join the Nebraska volleyball program in 2017, ending a 3-year process in which the 6'3" opposite hitter from Sioux Falls, South Dakota, put in considerable effort to catch the eyes of NU coaches. When I was a freshman, I went to a couple matches and to a camp, and I just knew this was where I wanted to go, Zabo said on Wednesday. Just the coaching, the program, I liked everything about it. Nebraska's relationship with Zabo, pronounced Aneshka Szabo, extended back 2 years, but an offer to join the team was extended last week after coaches saw her play in some recent club tournaments. She said NU coach John Cook reached her via Skype and said he'd seen enough to offer Szabo her long coveted spot. I worked hard for an offer, she said. When I finally got it, it was kind of an easy decision, I guess. Athleticism runs in Zabo's family. Her father, Brett, stands 6'11" and played basketball for Augustana, a former conference rival of UNO. He was with the Boston Celtics during the 1996-97 season. Being 6'3" and left-handed, his daughter has the physical makeup to be an ideal right side hitter, but she said attacking offensively is the part of her game that needs the most work. Mitch Lunning, her coach on the Caro's Elite Volleyball Club, agreed. She's dynamic and can jump really well, Lunning told the World Herald. She can touch 10.3.5 right now. Her arm swing is still raw. Once she improves that, she's a big-time player. Caro's Elite also produced Taryn Cloth, a sophomore outside hitter at Creighton this fall. As a junior last fall, Zabo was named second team all-class AA by the South Dakota Volleyball Coaches Association. The Rapid City Journal reported that she had 240 kills, 134 blocks, 39 solo, 37 aces, and 220 digs in 2015. She also competes in the long jump and triple jump for Sioux Falls Lincoln High School. Zabo said she also had scholarship offers from Kansas and Kansas State, while Ohio State also showed interest. But Nebraska was always the school to beat, she said. She attended NU's volleyball camp last summer and visited again in the fall, watching the Huskers lost to Wisconsin in October at the Devaney Center. The atmosphere there is awesome, she said. It's a really nice facility. Zabo's commitment gives Nebraska a pair of tall, left-handed pin hitters in the class of 2017, along with Topeka, Kansas outside hitter Jazz Sweet. Chesney McClellan, a 6'4" middle blocker from Knoxville, Tennessee, is slated to join NU next season.
Thanks. There's a long story here. We won't be able to fit it all in probably, but I'm going to start with a picture of a girl with some scull rowing equipment here. Doctor and Olympian has 2 goals in play at Cambridge, Massachusetts. On the walls of Harvard's Weld Boathouse, here on the banks of the Charles River, among the dozens of photos of women's crews gone by, is evidence of how long Jevy Stone has been around the sport of rowing. Look at the black and white team picture of the 1984-85 Radcliffe varsity heavyweights. There in the back row is the coach, Lisa Stone. That's Jevy's mom. She's wearing maternity overalls. There I am, Jevy Stone said last week, pointing at her mom's round middle in her belly. That was about 31 years ago. Of course, Stone gravitated to the water. Born to parents who were top American Olympic scholars, she had a feeling she'd end up racing a boat someday. I'd had an inkling I'd be good at it, she told me. You might say it was meant to be. You cannot say, however, that it has been simple. To make it to the height of a sport is never easy, even for those athletes wired for greatness. That's something to think about as teams bound for the Summer Games in Rio de Janeiro come together in the next weeks and months. What actually did it take to make it to the top? What did they give up? What are they willing to risk for success in Rio? For Stone, the Olympic dream has had its stops and starts. 6 feet tall and lean, she was part of an undefeated national championship women's 8 crew at Princeton and won 2 world championships in under-23 competition. After graduating in 2007, she put her acceptance to the Tufts University School of Medicine on hold to train for the 2008 Olympics. For graduation, her parents even bought her a single scull, an ice blue one with the red racing stripes, so she could fine-tune her skills in the small boat. Those seem to be the blueprints of a daughter whose family is legendary in the sport, at least in these parts. But there was a glitch. Stone didn't make the cut for the Olympic team. I felt like a failure, said Jevy, which is short for Ginevra. Stone nearly gave up rowing. After that, to get away, she worked as a camp counselor that summer while her former teammates raced in Beijing. Anyway, she's coming back to the sport and going to Rio on the Olympic team. It's 8 o'clock.
I think it's time for us to clear out of here.
I'm sure that's true.
Thanks so much for joining in, and please join us again. Maybe not us, but someone next week at the same time.
Right, thank you.
All right. That brings us to the end of your live reading for another lovely Thursday evening.
No, it came back good.
No,
Live reading
still
in the morning.
Wheel of Death.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So stay tuned in for that in the
That's
morning.
computer business.
So it was nice to have the paper.
A reminder that Omaha Days is coming up at the end of this month. We always want any donation of any kind, and it's a minimum of $10. So schedule your donation now. You can do that so that you don't have to even remember about doing that yourself. All right. Well, I'm going to get to go on the rest of your programming. And you listeners out there, keep listening to the Radio Talking Book Network and keep listening.
I have to turn that off last time, and they said, no, let her do it. So,
Coming up next on your Radio Talking Books Network, time to sit around the radio and get ready to be chilled and thrilled. Your CBS Radio Mystery Theater and E.G. Marshall.
I got it.